yourself believing something that you know couldn't possibly be true? Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. When I was 5 years old, my parents and I lived in Berkeley, California. And most weekends, we drove down to the Central Valley to visit my grandparents. It took about 2 hours to get there. But for my 5-year-old sense of time, it seemed to take about 2 years. But I always knew when we were just about to get to Grandma's house, because right before we took the exit, over on the side by the railroad tracks, there were these tall cylindrical buildings that I later learned were grain silos that carried the chicken food for the chickens that lived at the Foster Farms chicken factory. But just to me, they looked really strange. So I asked my mom, what are those buildings for? And she answered me without batting an eyelash. Oh, those buildings? That's where they test all the eggs that the chickens lay. They take them up to the top of the buildings and they drop them off. And the ones that don't break get sent to the supermarket so that we can buy them. And she said this with such conviction that I believed her whopper, hook, line, and sinker. And I never questioned it, so that for years, every time we drove past those buildings, I would remember, oh, those are for egg testing. And it was about maybe when I was 12 or 13 that I finally realized with a jolt, hey, that can't possibly be true. If I could believe that eggs had to pass a drop test before getting sent to market, I have to wonder what other kind of crazy ideas got lodged in my brain before I had the developmental capacity to analyze them. In particular, after hearing Rudy speak several times in the last few weeks in passionate defense of feminism, thank you, I've been pondering how it is in this day and age, in 2019, women are still not automatically given equal rights and equal pay, and we're still doing the bulk of the housekeeping and childcare chores. Are we perhaps unconsciously setting our children up to believe that women should just be pretty doormats, when what we really want to do is inspire them to be total badasses? Yeah, I think we are. And I think at least part of the problem is the outdated stories we read to our kids and let them watch on videos, even some that are considered beloved classics. So I'd like a show of hands. How many of you have seen Disney's animated Cinderella? Really? I thought it was more, but basically, do you realize that Disney's unchanged version, it hasn't changed for 70 years? So how many generations have experienced that single unchanged story of Cinderella? And yet, how much has the world changed in the last 7 decades? We continue to be enthralled and unduly influenced by Disney's distillation of what a young woman should be that's based in 1950s social mores. So what kind of ideas do we pick up unknowingly from that Cinderella movie or any Cinderella story? Beautiful, demure, graceful, slender, sweet, kind, biddable blonde girls are good. Ugly, ungraceful, mean, loud, big-boned, argumentative girls are bad. The only way for a girl to move up in the world is to find a husband. Good girls have no control over their lives. Without the protection of a man, girls are helpless and subject to abuse and degradation. There's a lot more, but you get the idea. So by the age of 3, I was already so steeped in the Cinderella story that when my mom accidentally dropped and broke a water glass and ran off to the kitchen to get a broom, I tried to put my foot into the glass because it looked like a glass slipper to me. Yeah, I did cut my foot. So you can see that I knew the story, but I still didn't have any capacity for reasoning or judgment. I was in what Jean Piaget called the pre-operational stage of development. That's the age between 2 and 7 when we've learned language, but we don't have the ability to use logic yet. It's in this stage when we acquire information that lays the groundwork for belief systems that we carry throughout our lives, mostly without ever questioning it. Like I didn't question the egg story because we don't even believe it's in there or don't realize it's in there. So here's how this played out later in my life. Several years ago, I had another one of those aha moments where I realized I'd been laboring under beliefs that I didn't even agree with. Consciously, I thought of myself as a modern woman. I was a college graduate. I had started my own business. Yes, I was married and I was raising a child, but I thought of myself and my husband as equals. Then one of my clients told me a story about her Japanese granddaughter who wanted to go to medical school, but her family was insisting that she be a debutante and prepare herself for the young suitor who would come. When she said those words, it was like I was a tuning fork and she just struck the note that made me vibrate to my core. I had instant recognition. Nobody in my family had ever said that to me in so many words, but the expectation was absolutely the same. I had been encouraged to push myself and improve myself to the utmost of my ability, but I realized in that moment it was never for me. It was to prepare myself for the young suitor who would come. And once I made that match, then my whole life was to be devoted to him, promoting his career and raising children. Deep underneath my veneer of modern feminist ideals, the Cinderella story still had me hogtied. If we want to change the world, we can start by updating our stories. We can be more mindful of what our children are exposed to, particularly before the age of 7, so that we are not placing them on the slippery slope from the glass slipper to the glass ceiling. Thank you.